Large parts of the country are preparing for the coldest temperatures seen in decades. President Trump has continued to downplay the role of climate change in all this, and he's not alone.
If global warming is caused by your SUV, why is it that we are seeing global warming on every other body in the solar system? As you know, for the last decade or so, the Martian South Polar ice cap has conspicuously receded. Pluto's warming about 2 degrees Celsius over the past 14 years.
What about
I'm pretty sure
the White Cliffs of Dover, California, where you have the waves crashing against the shorelines, and time again, you're having the cliffs crash into the sea. All of that displaces water, which forces it to rise, does it not?
We keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record. I asked the chair, you know what this is? It's a snowball, and that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out.
I'm joined now by Bill Nye, the science guy, author of Everything All at Once. Bill, why do people do this? Why do they come up with these comical excuses to deny the science?
Well, it really starts with the fossil fuel industry, who has been working very hard to introduce the idea that doubt, that scientific uncertainty, plus or minus 2%, is the same as plus or minus 100%. In fact, they've hired the same people that the cigarette industry hired. And it was Luntz, the pollster, who said, doubt is your friend. He coached Republican presidential nominees to introduce the idea that there's doubt about the scientific uncertainty, so therefore there's doubt about the whole thing. And that's patently wrong. And it's very frustrating for those of us in the science education community or on the fact-based side of things.
What can you say to the people on the ground? The great majority, almost 2/3 of Trump voters, say it's not an issue with them personally. Whatever you make of that, that's what they say. It's not an issue with me personally.
I think it really is. If you ask any farmer, any professional in agriculture, the pests and parasites are showing up earlier in the growing season. They're sticking around longer. And this makes farmers have more what we call inputs, more pesticides, more herbicides, more mechanical removal of rogue weeds and stuff. And this is very expensive. And so it'll add to the cost of food. And the other problem is the growing in North America, which is the breadbasket of the world even now. The agriculture in North America is going to have to move north into what would nominally be Canada. And we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the railroads and roads to get food from that area to where we need it around the world. And of course, it can be built. But the longer we mess around and not address this problem, the more difficult it's going to be. I claim that the people in rural areas are affected perhaps even more than people in urban areas. And they've been hoodwinked. They've been led astray by this group of like-minded people who feel that the economic effects of getting away from fossil fuels are going to be catastrophic. But that is just simply not true.
You know, every time I see a Koch brothers ad, I think these guys ought to get a tax write-off for this. And that would be a sick thing to do, obviously, but it's in their economic interest, isn't it? The Koch brothers, that industry, that fossil fuel industry, gas and oil, to deny that it's in their economic interest to deny science.
Well, that's
why they run all these advertisements. Yeah.
That's their perception. So if everybody, I am not a member, I'm not on the board of directors of the solutionsproject.org, but check it out. These are civil engineers who have done an analysis of our electrical grid, and they believe, quite reasonably, that we could go 80% sustainable, renewable, in 15 or 20 years, and 100% in about twice that. And this would change the world. The United States wouldn't need to get its energy from overseas. It would be domestic energy. And of course, some of the people that are very concerned about climate change are in the U.S. military. And they would welcome not having to protect oil fields on the other side of the world.
Okay.
The overreaching effect of climate change is a problem that a lot of people have trouble with because it's happening in what seems like slow motion, and it is literally global.
I see it in Africa, people in these parts of the land with the growing Sahara Desert and the Sahel, and there's no more arable land left, and there's no trees left, and people are moving north into Europe. And in our country, in our hemisphere, it's people from Central and Latin America moving north, because how much is climate related to that migration pattern?
Well, that's not clear about Central America, but it is clear about Florida. People are going, there's two cities. There's Miami and there's Miami Beach. People in Miami Beach are quite wealthy, and they can afford to have so-called mitigation, seawalls and so on. But middle class and lower income people in Miami cannot afford to have their cars flooded once a month, their wheel wells of their cars flooded once a month, and they're going to move north in Florida. And where are they going to go? And are they going to abandon their mortgages? What is going to be the economic effect of that? It's far-reaching, and I understand it's very troubling for a lot of us to think that a human species, just a few people on the earth, could somehow change the climate of the entire world, but we are doing it. And if you live in a rural area, well, the effect may be less apparent because your neighbors are so far away, but it's happening. Thank you, Chris.
We should have you back regularly, and we will. Thank you, Bill Nye, the science guy.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.